On November 17, 2025, about 30 hikers were getting ready to attempt the hardest section of a week-long journey through Chilean Patagonia. They were already on the fourth day of their trip when an unexpected hurricane-force storm battered the mountain in near whiteout conditions, forcing everyone to turn around and head back to camp. But when the survivors finally returned, 5 hikers were still missing. What happened that day would later reveal that none of them should have been allowed to continue in the first place. This is the story of the 2025 Chilean Patagonia All-Circuit disaster. Patagonia is a huge and remote region covering the southern parts of both Chile and Argentina. It stretches across rugged mountains, open grasslands, deep valleys, forests, glaciers, and long stretches of coastline. On the Chilean side, the landscape is especially dramatic, with narrow fjords, enormous ice fields, and steep peaks of the Andes rising above large glacial lakes. The region is famous for its beauty, but is also known for some of the most unpredictable weather in the world. Strong winds can suddenly sweep through the mountains, while rain, snow, and freezing temperatures can arrive with little warning, even during the warmer months. Many of the trails also pass through isolated areas with limited shelter, poor communication, and no phone signal. Anyone caught far from a campsite can quickly become overwhelmed when the weather suddenly changes. The most famous location in Chilean Patagonia is Torres del Paine National Park. It is located in the far south of Chile in the Magallanes region of Patagonia. The park covers a huge area filled with mountains, glaciers, forests, rivers, and bright blue lakes. Its most recognizable features are the 3 granite towers that give the park its name, along with the sharp peaks of the Paine mountain range and the enormous Gray Glacier. Because of its dramatic scenery, Torres del Paine attracts hikers and tourists from around the world. In 2024, the park recorded more than 367,000 visits, making it the most visited protected wilderness area in the Magallanes region. More than 200,000 of those visitors came from outside Chile. The park was also declared a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve in 1978. Its 2 best-known hiking routes are the shorter W Trek and the much longer O Circuit, which takes hikers around the entire Paine mountain range. Despite being popular, much of the Torres del Paine remains remote. Some sections are several days into the trail and have little or no phone service. When something goes wrong, hikers may be hours away from the nearest campsite or any outside help. On November 13, about 30 hikers were attempting the Matitso Paine Circuit, more commonly known as the O Circuit. It is a 130-kilometer or 80-mile trek around the Paine Massif and is the longest and most demanding hiking route in Torres del Paine National Park. The full journey normally takes around 8 to 10 days, with hikers carrying their equipment between a series of campsites and mountain refuges. The hike begins at Los Torres and makes a full loop around the mountain range. Hikers carry their clothing, food, and equipment between campsites and can be several hours apart. Once they leave each morning, there may be no safe place to stop until the next camp. The most difficult part is the journey from Los Perros camp across John Gardner Pass and then down toward Gray Glacier. John Gardner Pass is the highest point of the circuit at around 1,200 meters or 3,900 feet above sea level. Hikers must climb roughly 600 meters over 4 steep kilometers before beginning another long and difficult descent. The pass is completely exposed to Patagonia's powerful winds, snow, and rapidly changing weather. From the top, hikers can normally see Gray Glacier and part of the southern Patagonian icefield stretching across the valley below. The first 3 days of the hike were mostly uneventful. The forecast mentioned winds around 100 kilometers per hour or 60 miles per hour, but strong winds were common in this part of Patagonia. The hikers had already experienced difficult weather during the trip, so the forecast did not immediately seem like a reason to panic. More hikers also arrived along the route and eventually joined the others making their way around the circuit. Many eventually reached Los Perros, the final campsite before John Gardner Pass. After 3 tiring days, they could rest, eat, and sleep before attempting the hardest section the next morning. The forecast for the next day called for winds around 96 km per hour or 60 miles per hour. Staff at the campsite warned the hikers that the weather could be unpredictable, but they also made it sound like these conditions were normal. Some hikers directly asked whether it was safe to continue and were told that this type of weather was common and that people had crossed the pass in even worse conditions. There was another problem the hikers were not warned about. No official park rangers were working along the remote Los Perros and John Gardner sector. If something happened on the pass, professional help was not nearby. Just days earlier, other hikers had crossed John Gardner Pass and reached the Gray campsite on the other side. After experiencing the severe winds themselves, they warned the staff at Gray that the pass needed to be closed. Some of them had friends still staying at Los Perros, but they could not contact them because there was no signal. Staff at Gray reportedly notified the staff at Los Perros, but the pass remained open. Some hikers became worried and stayed at Los Perros, but around 30 others continued. They had spent days reaching this point, and many assumed that if the trail remained open, the conditions must still be considered safe enough. On the morning of November 17, the hikers left Los Perros in small groups beginning around 6 a.m. John Gardner Pass was already considered the hardest section of the whole circuit. Hikers had to make a long, steep climb over mud, tree roots, and loose rocks before reaching the top. Reaching the summit was only half the challenge because an even longer and steeper descent waited on the other side. The full journey from Los Perros to Gray normally takes around 10 to 12 hours, with very few places to stop or shelter. Above the tree line, hikers are completely exposed. Snow and ice can hide the trail markers and make the steep slopes extremely dangerous. The hikers continued climbing toward the summit when the wind suddenly became much worse and the temperature quickly dropped to -5 degrees Celsius or about 25 degrees Fahrenheit, but with wind chill it would feel like -20 Celsius or -4 Fahrenheit. Winds reportedly reach 195 kilometers per hour or 120 miles per hour, similar in strength to the sustained winds of a Category 3 hurricane. The hikers struggled to stay on their feet, and some had to crawl across the ground to avoid being knocked over or pushed down the slope. Then a blizzard came down on them, bringing visibility to almost zero. They could barely see a few meters in front of them and had to rely on GPS devices to figure out where they were. The trail markers slowly disappeared behind blowing snow, making it difficult to tell whether they were still following the correct path. One of the hikers close to the summit had to use his GPS just to know where to go. His GPS showed they were only about 50 meters from the summit, but decided they had to turn around. Crossing the summit would still leave them with a long descent, and in those conditions, reaching the top did not mean they were safe. The other hikers began turning back as well. The return to Los Perros was not easy. They were now moving downhill through snow, strong winds, and almost no visibility. Groups that had started at different times became separated, and hikers focused on staying close to anyone they could still see. When the survivors eventually reached Los Perros, they used the campsite's registration records to complete a head count. That was when they realized 5 people had not returned. One of those missing hikers was 40-year-old British hiker Victoria Bond, who had become separated from her friends somewhere near the pass. Her friends made it back to camp, but she did not. There were no national park rangers at the campsite to organize an immediate rescue. Instead, the survivors gathered volunteers and prepared to go back into the same storm they had barely escaped. There were doctors among the hikers who were ready to provide medical help. The volunteers had to make a makeshift stretcher and carried sleeping bags, thermoses, and a defibrillator up the mountain. The first people the volunteers came across were a Mexican couple, 37-year-old Cristina Tovar and 36-year-old Julian Pimentel. Julian was already dead when the rescuers reached him. He appeared to have suffered a head injury, although exactly what happened to him remains unclear. With the mountain covered in ice and winds powerful enough to knock hikers off their feet, it is possible that he slipped or was blown down before striking his head. He may have lost consciousness and then died from the injury, the freezing conditions, or a combination of both. Christina was still alive and calling for help. The rescuers placed her on the stretcher and began carrying her toward Los Perros. They had no choice but to leave Julian behind so they could focus on saving her. Not far from the Mexican couple, the rescuers found 45-year-old German hiker Nadine Lichi. She and her husband, 52-year-old Andreas von Paine, had been caught higher up in one of the most exposed sections of the pass. There were almost no trees, buildings, or large areas of natural shelter around them. As the visibility disappeared, the couple would have had very few places to hide from the snow and powerful winds. At some point, they became separated or were found in different places along the trail. Nadine was still responsive when the volunteers reached her, but she was already suffering from severe hypothermia. They wrapped her in a sleeping bag, placed bottles of warm water around her, and tried to protect her from the wind. However, the conditions made it impossible to safely carry her down the mountain. Despite their attempts to keep her warm, Nadine eventually died on the pass and they had to leave her on the mountain. Her husband, Andreas von Paine, was still missing, along with Victoria Bond. The victims were spread across the pass, while the volunteers had limited equipment and no official rescue team. For around 5 hours, the rescuers struggled to carry Cristina back toward Los Perros. As they came within reach of the campsite, she suffered cardiac arrest caused by severe hypothermia. The doctors who were part of the rescue group tried to revive her for around an hour, but sadly, she did not survive. An SOS alert had already been sent, but official rescue teams were slow to arrive. Later, another hiker posted an urgent message in Torres del Paine hiking group on Facebook. The post explained that hikers were still missing and that volunteers were trying to rescue them without professional support. The message quickly spread between guides, refuge, and tourism companies, putting more pressure on the authorities to act. It was not until the next day that official rescue teams reached the campsite. By then, the weather had eased enough for them to move farther up the pass. They recovered Julian's body and found the remaining 2 missing hikers. Andreas von Paine was found dead, while Victoria Bond, who had reached one of the highest points in the mountain, was found near rocks where she appeared to have tried to shelter from the storm. She had become separated from her 4 British friends near the highest part of the pass. Victoria was reportedly found near a group of rocks where she appeared to have tried to shield herself from the wind. With no proper shelter nearby, she likely crouched behind the rocks and used whatever clothing and equipment she had to hold on to her body heat. But the cold and the wind were relentless. Temperatures had dropped below freezing, while the wind chill made it feel closer to minus 20 degrees Celsius. She remained alone in the mountain through the night until searchers found her the following day. The rocks may have blocked part of the wind, but they were not enough to protect her for that long. Victoria eventually succumbed to the freezing conditions and hypothermia before rescuers could reach her. The bodies of Nadine and Julian were also recovered. Questions quickly turned to why the hikers had been allowed onto the pass. Several warnings, staffing problems, and failures in communication appeared to have played a part. The reason no rangers were stationed in the remote sector was that those assigned to the area had traveled toward the park entrances so they could vote in Chile's national election the previous day. Although private workers remained at Los Perros and dozens of ranger employees were stationed elsewhere in the park, no ranger was present near John Gardner Pass when the weather became dangerous. The hikers also said they were told the next ranger station on the other side of the pass would be open and could be used as shelter. They only learned after returning to Los Perros that the hut was locked and there were no rangers stationed there. This mattered because the thought of reaching the shelter gave some hikers a reason to keep moving forward even as the weather became worse. Many survivors later voiced their anger. They said that if they had known the hut was locked and no rangers were working along the route, they would not have attempted the pass. They also believed it was safe to continue because campsite workers had said the weather was normal for Patagonia and the hikers had crossed in worse conditions. Together, those statements gave them a false sense that the route was safe to pass. Although the storm directly caused the hikers' deaths, investigators also found serious weaknesses in the way the route was managed. Poor trail markings, limited emergency preparations, and the absence of rangers led investigators to examine both CONAF, Chile's National Forestry Corporation, the government-linked organization responsible for managing Torres del Paine National Park, including its rangers, trails, and safety closures, and the private campsite operators. New safety procedures were later introduced, including stricter weather rules and additional controls for hikers attempting the circuit. But as of the making of this video, no person or organization had been officially found responsible for the disaster. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you. You can also watch more stories you probably never heard before by clicking on the videos here, or you can go directly to my channel. If you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you can subscribe to my channel and click on that notification button so you don't miss any stories. Again, thank you and have a good and wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.